Welcome to The Finder of Lost Things, exploring your superpowers of trust, healing and transformation, with me, Hannah Belton. My brother, Christian, disappeared in Mali, Africa in 2003. He disappeared without a trace. We lost his story, we didn't have closure, we lost so much. I was fighting and searching to find Christian when actually I just needed to sit in stillness and attract him in. I was so resistant to doing this, but I had to surrender. It's a process of trusting and finding the lost pieces and integrating them. This podcast will uncover the process that Christian and I went on to find the lost things, him, and to find the parts of me that were missing.
And we were destined from the start to tell our story into the dark, for we were born to a great white shark.
Hi, welcome in. Come on in. As usual, come and sit around in a circle. I've got a brilliant story for you today, and I've got a brilliant person for you to meet as well. I just want to bring in a thread, really, pull a thread through from the last program, which we were talking about. There was quite a lot about me for most of the program, but towards the end, Christian came in and we were talking about his sort of fear of not being himself and his fear of not being believed. And I'm going to pull that thread through into this show because I'd really like to introduce you to one of Christian's favourite people, is his lovely friend, Sara Jaffar. And there's a story. Well, obviously she can tell us about her memories of Christian and the influence that Christian had in her life. And also she was involved when he went missing and the effect that had on her. And then also Sarah and I had never met, but then we suddenly met in the most amazing circumstances, and it was so obvious that Christian was involved in our meeting. And I also want to tease out what it meant, where we met, what we were doing when we met, and kind of the lessons that we can pull out from all of this story. So I want to introduce you to Sara. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Hannah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really lovely to have you. I know Christian's been wanting, he immediately, I think I emailed you almost when we started the shows and asked you if you would come on because, it was very important that you were with us for one of these shows. So can you just sort of tell me a bit about how you met Christian and what your sort of, your relationship with him really?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact moment that I met Chrissy, but I met him pretty early on. We were at Edinburgh University together and we were in these big halls of residence, Pollock halls, and I kind of think it might have been somebody like Angus Peters who first introduced us. I think maybe they were in the same house, maybe Ramsey, someone like that. And Chrissy was just, one of the most well-loved, well-liked people out of our cohort, really. He was lovely to everybody. He was one of those people that got on with everybody, and he was always fun. He was always up for having fun. He was amusing. He had great taste in music. I remember him introducing me to quite a lot of reggae. Yellow Man he loved, and he was just a great person to be around. I think everybody felt that way about him.
And then you shared a flat with him as well, didn't you?
Later, we did.
Through the years,
I think it must have been, so first year we were in the halls of residence, so it was in our third year I shared a flat with Chrissy and another guy called Sam Rice-Edwards and another girl, Sarah Keeley. The four of us shared a flat together, which was, it was good fun.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say it must have been when we were living together that I think I said this to you the other day. One of the things I remember about Chrissy is he taught me how to chop onions correctly. And it must have been then when we were living together that he did that. And, I sort of went on, because cooking's been quite a big part of my life. I actually worked in a restaurant for a while as I was actually a pastry chef in a Michelin star restaurant, but so I didn't chop a lot of onions then. But it's just funny that, Chrissy, cooking had always been something that was in my life, but until the age of 20, I didn't know how to chop an onion as efficiently as he did.
Well, I'm quite good at chopping onions as well. I think Mum was good at it as well. She was cordon bleu trained, so I think she probably passed that on to us. I'm glad that's something that he's brought into the, passed on as well. That's brilliant. So what have you got any sort of memories? Because we were talking last week, Christian was sort of saying that he was quite he quite liked doing dangerous things, and he was always kind of pushing himself emotionally and physically. Can you remember any sort of madcap things that he was up to that would probably make his mother's hair curl?
He used to go off and climb these, those huge cranes they have when they're doing building, big commercial building projects. And when we were at Edinburgh, it was before the Parliament was there, so it was the early 90s. We went, 94 we started. So I think Edinburgh, it's developed a lot since we first got there. So there were these huge cranes across the city, and Chrissy used to go at night. He'd sort of go and climb up them and then walk along the arms that stick out of them. I was just thinking about it today. I was talking to my dad about it. They're like hundreds of feet up in the air, absolutely nuts. But yeah, he was somebody who pushed him. He was quite a physical person. He used to go to the gym a lot. I remember going to the gym with him. I'm not a great gym person, but I did go with Chrissy once or twice. He made me run there. That was the warm up, was running to the gym, and then doing a workout and then running back. And I think I did it about twice, and I thought, no, it's all right, Chris, you go on your own. I'm not going.
Yeah, because he did boxing as well. He was a good boxer, really good boxer. But yeah, so he was, he had this, did he do these things on his own, or he didn't take anyone with him, did he?
I'm not sure definitely I never went. I'm not sure if one or two of the boys used to go, but I don't know that they actually climbed the cranes. I don't know. Even
when you say it, it sounds like, well, yeah, he obviously never told us at home about doing that kind of thing. I've since found out, and he's sort of told me as well since. But yes, it's like one of those surprising things about him that he loved to push himself, definitely, and hence this trip that he did to Africa. I suppose we better start talking about that, because obviously you left Edinburgh, or left university, and then you moved down to London, I believe.
Yeah.
And and Christian then he was off doing all of his travels in the Caribbean, and he was did you kept in touch with him while he was doing all his various travels around the world?
I remember he did a book on the flora and fauna of in the Caribbean, didn't he? Right. Then he came back and he moved to Brighton, I think. And he used to come up, wasn't that far from Brighton up to London. He used to come up and see us, quite often. Mm-hmm. So we very much stayed in touch. He was at my wedding, and which was only maybe 6 months or so, I think, before he went on his trip to Africa.
Mm-hmm. So you were telling me you met him for he had a leavings drink up in London. Can you just tell me about that? So that's what happened there, and your sort of thoughts around it.
Yeah, so I remember going to the drinks with a couple of other friends from Edinburgh, and when I was coming to leave, I went to say goodbye to Chrissy, and I just got this overwhelming sense of dread, really. And I just
can feel it now. Actually, I've got it in my body. I can.
Yeah, I just knew that something bad was going to happen, and I remember looking into his eyes, and I said, Chrissy, please be careful. I knew there was no point saying don't go. I mean, it was all, he'd been planning it for months, and he was so excited about it, to be, following in the footsteps of Mungo Park, and it was what he wanted to do. But yeah, I just looked at him and I said, please, will you be careful? And I remember he just went like that with his head, and he laughed, and he said, oh, I'll be fine, Jaffs, don't worry about it, I'll be fine. And I don't know, I remember walking back to the tube and just feeling really kind of deflated. I think I just felt, I don't know, I don't feel good about this. And and we were talking about it a little bit the other day, and I think as a family member, when somebody's going to do something like that, it's inevitable that you will feel that. But I think, as a friend, it's slightly different. You don't worry about your friends in the same way, do you? So yeah. And then, so when he was due back and he missed his flight, I was obviously upset, but I can't say I was. It wasn't a huge shock. It sort of was, because there'd been a few months since I'd seen him, and I suppose you sort of forget a little bit. I'd slightly forgotten how I'd felt when I'd said goodbye to him, but when I heard the news, I sort of, it came back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was your kind of so you weren't surprised because of the sort of feeling you'd had before? Did you feel like you could help in any way, or take some action, or I don't know, or did you feel quite sort of helpless about it all?
Well, it's difficult to know in something like that what you can do, obviously. Mm-hmm. I remember that quite a few people from Edinburgh were getting things together, trying to organise, talking to journalists, or, anything that would help, any contacts that anybody had. So that was all going on. And I was involved with that to an extent. And then a couple of them decided they were going to go out to Africa. And it did cross my mind, should I say that I'll go? But, I mean, I didn't, I never sort of formally volunteered. So I think Sam was going, and I can't remember if somebody else went as well. So no, I mean, we did things like healing circles. I remember going to a couple of things like that with other friends from Edinburgh, and sort of trying to get in touch with fixers and people in West Africa to see if anybody had contacts that could just help, really. Because it's not part of the world that is that easy if you don't have contacts there. So yeah, it was really that kind of stuff. But
completely difficult place.
Yeah, really, and not a part of the world that I personally knew anything about, really, other than from what Chris had said about his travels.
Then we had that whole period where everything sort of went quiet after all the searches and done. I mean, that probably lasted for about, probably all in all, about 18 months, I guess, where we had, Sam went out, and then we had the police went out, and absolutely no trace of Christian. I mean, it was unbelievable that after everybody that was helping, absolutely nothing. And then I had it kind of lasted till, I know we were talking the last episode about, we had a party for Christian, so his 40th birthday party, which unfortunately you couldn't come to, so I didn't even meet you then, because you were busy with your B&B at the time, and then it it was 2016 really that I kind of got this calling to do a research for Christian on using social media. And I know at the time I was sort of sending out emails to all of Christian's friends. Oh, I should say I call him Christian because we have an Uncle Chris in our family, so it kind of it's easier to call him Christian, but I know you call him Chrissy, and I know he's got so many different names, but you know, all these nicknames. But as I was coming up with all these leads and you know, sightings of Christian and all that, and I was sending these emails out, what was kind of your reaction to what I was saying? I remember you were sort of saying it wasn't quite ringing true with you, all these things.
No, I mean, I remember there were a woman, wasn't there, and I can't remember what country now it was in, but she yeah, and in fact there were a couple of people I think that claimed to have seen him, and it's sort of I think before that I'd sort of reconciled myself that, you know, he was gone and we would never see him again. And then obviously you had this renewed search for him, and that threw up a couple of sightings, and I did sort of think, well, you know, maybe, you know, there's nothing to say that I'm right, that we won't see him again, you know, hopefully maybe that he is still somewhere and can be brought back. But then I think when you sent out, it was a while after that, I can't really remember the timelines now, but it was a little while after that, you sent one out saying, you know, none of this is accurate, and you know, he isn't there. And then I did feel, yeah, I kind of think that's right. These people haven't really seen him. They've either made it up or they've seen someone who looks like him or whatever, but it's not Chris. It's you know, he's gone.
Yeah.
So
that was that sort of and at that point I was I think that I looked back through my emails, and I emailed everybody on the I think it must have been May 2018, so that was like even just when I'd sort of started to talk to Chris, or we just had the revelation that he was actually dead. I mean, I think I've been talking or telling everybody that I had been communicating with Christian for quite a long time. And I don't know, his friends, I mean, you were probably quite open to that, but I think a lot of his friends probably would have thought I was like had gone mad or I was like it was the grief, like I was deluded in that sort of grief. Well,
I think it's something that's quite difficult for people to understand if they haven't experienced it themselves. Yeah, absolutely. We're not really brought up to think that things like that are real, you know. And even if you are open to it, I think it's really easy to also say, well, is it real or is it my imagination?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I spent so long questioning it and testing it, and I think probably what we're going to talk about, how we actually met, was like a confirmation for me. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I was continually testing this and thinking I was going mad and thinking, yeah, I think we've talked about it before in the episodes, but yeah, it was a really difficult time. But I think, did you ever feel, Christian, sort of energetically? I know we talked about when I don't know if it was then, but at some point where you'd kind of thought, oh yeah, that's the right story.
Well, I think it was when you sent, you must have sent an email out around then in May saying, May 18, saying, you know, it's not, and yeah, and I think I felt and it's sort of this thing, you don't know if it's your imagination or not, but yeah, I felt as if I could feel his energy then. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he by that time, I know there were a couple of people that he was making contact with in term either feeling next to him or like hearing his voice kind of thing. So that would be fine. So if we now kind of like move to, we're going to be moving to November 2018, so a few months after that. Shall I just sort of say what happened from my point of view, and then if you want to add in what was happening from your point of view. So yeah, November 2018. So the story behind it really is I'd had a couple of years of really intense searching for Christian, and then communicating with him and essentially finding out that he was dead. And we'd actually by November we had written a book together, which is the Lost and Found book. And he was also starting to tell me about a new adventure that he wanted to go on with me. I was like, oh my God. But he was talking about finding these camera cards, or they're like films that he'd taken. So stills camera, and he had a film camera. So he was wanting me to go and find out what had happened to him, and also to find his belongings that had been taken. And I was like so resistant to it, but I started to do Facebook films with him. So I was starting to document it and starting to document it really. And he was so enthusiastic, that energy you were talking about. He's a big energy, isn't he? He's like in your face in many ways, just this boundless energy. And it was all quite exhausting really. But I still had loads of grief to clear, because obviously we'd only really just found out, and I had a lot of grief in my body still that I didn't even realize. I had a lot of there was just layers and layers that I had to get rid of. But actually we were in Cornwall, and the day I went to visit the National Witch Museum down in Boscastle, in the Witchcraft Museum down in Boscastle in Cornwall. And the evening I got back, I got an email through from Rebecca Campbell, who is, when I had my sort of real dark night of the soul in 2016, and I was completely broken, she kind of came into my life. So she's a spiritual teacher, leader, I guess. And I was reading her books. I've got a couple of them here. So there's Light is the New Black and Rise Sister Rise, and her oracle cards there as well. So anyway, she had this offer of an event, and I was like, oh, this could be really good, to mark 2 years. I've just done all this stuff. Let's go have a day off, leave the kids at home, leave the husband at home. Let's go to London. So when I booked the tickets, there was an option of premier seating, and I knew immediately that I had to book it straight away, and I had to get the premier seating, which was obviously going to be quite near Rebecca, but I wouldn't have normally done that. I'd have normally just stayed in the gods, But it was like I had to do that. When I got there, so it was a full day event. It was up at the Royal Institution up in very smart up in Mayfair in London.
Really, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And we were all sitting there, and I walked in, and we did a meditation first. Rebecca came out, we did a meditation first. And then we had to work with a partner, and I didn't go with anyone. So I just was with this lovely lady who was from New Zealand. And we had to ask each other. So we were questioning each other. What does your soul long for? That was the first kind of question. And we had to talk with our partner. And I actually wrote down my responses afterwards. And I said, which really surprised me, because I'll tell you what I said. I said a pathway, a helper, a platform, expansion, hugs for the world, Loss is an illusion. After 2 years, I'm now ready to lead and teach, and also to pass on the messages and lessons. And I was like, oh, well, that's quite grand, isn't it? Like, I thought I was just coming for a day off and I just bit of peace and quiet. And then the next question was to do with, what is your soul wanting you to do? And I thought, oh, here we go. So we were talking between us, and instead of like a soul voice that I was hearing, like a very sort of soft, as I would call my soul voice, which is, yeah, it's like your heart. What's your heart really saying? So that was a gentle kind of voice. Christian came barging in, and he was absolutely adamant. He was like, get the microphone. And I was like, what do you mean? And the girl I was with, we looked around and I said, he's telling me to get the microphone, and I'm shaking. I can feel it now. I'm beginning to shake already, because I was like, what on earth am I being asked to do? And he kept insisting, get the microphone. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get the microphone? You know, they had the runners, people were around. So you would put your hand up, and Rebecca would sometimes ask you to speak, so the runner would come to you with a microphone. And like he was so insistent, you need to get the microphone, and that's all he was saying. And then he kind of stopped as I was getting more and more nervous, and he said, Rebecca needs to hear you say thank you for all she did for you in those first few months. You must get that microphone, and like, don't be afraid. We're going to say the words for you. Don't be afraid. It's going to be fine. And yeah, the girl I was with, it was really quite frightening, because there was about 400 people there, wasn't there? Anyway, there was about 400 people there, and it was all just pretty intense. Anyway, after that session, Rebecca then asked if anybody wanted to report what they'd said. And my hand shot up, and I just couldn't stop myself. It was, I thought, she's never going to turn around, because it was like an old fashioned, sort of like an old scientific atrium, wasn't it? I mean, like all these massive, it was round and quite intense, but they were up in the gods and all the way down. And she literally, as I put my hand up, she turned and she looked straight at me and she said, oh yeah, you can, whatever she said. And I literally must have squealed in delight or in shock or something. I don't know what it was. And like, I've got no real recollection of what I actually, of actually speaking. But I know I was kind of, my voice was sort of breaking, and I thanked Rebecca. You know, I said, I don't know why I'm saying this, but thank you, Rebecca, for pulling me out of this hole that I was in. And then and like Christian was going, you must say your name. And I said, oh, my name's Hannah Velton. And my brother Christian had gone missing in Africa in 2003. But this year I'd found out that he'd been killed. He wasn't missing. But it was okay, because we'd started to communicate, and you know, I'm going to be here. My sort of soul calling is to be telling people about this loss is an illusion, and that teaching others and what we'd learned. And like, people were clapping, and I sort of sat down and thought, oh, thank goodness for that. I can just have a relax now. And Christian had gone silent. And we carried on for quite a long time. It was a long old day, and I had no sort of emotional or intuitive reactions to any of the other meditations or the chants or anything. And then we had to break, and we were invited to go on a break. And then when we came back, we had to pick up one of the oracle cards, which from that deck I've just shown you, and Rebecca had put them all over the floor when we came back in. And we had to, before we went out, we had to set our intention to receive guidance, you know, on what we wanted when we came back in to pick up the cards. And my partner and I both decided it was going to be about work. It was going to be about career and obviously what we were here to do. And then a few minutes into the break, we were just sitting there sort of chatting away. And I think we probably just stood up to go to the break. And I heard this voice behind me saying, Hannah. And I thought, that's just, what? And I turned round and there's Sara standing there. And she said to me, like, hi, I'm Sara Jaffar. I'm a friend of Christian's. And I can still feel it now. It's going to make me cry because I was like, holy, what is going on here? I mean, I don't know, from your point of view, how did you...
Well, I think that's what was so amazing about it, really, isn't it? Because we hadn't met. I mean, we could have met, you know, a number of times, but we hadn't. So I would never have recognised you in that crowd if it hadn't been for the fact that you stood up and said your name. I mean, I can't really remember exactly what you said, but if you said your name, obviously I, knew who you were, and I remember just turning to my friend that I'd come to the event with and saying, I can't believe it. This friend of mine went missing, and that's his sister. And you were literally sitting a couple of rows in front of us.
Yeah.
And so I just think my sort of take on it was that Chrissy, he probably knew I wouldn't stand up and speak in that room of 400 people. So he told you had to stand up and say your name, because if you hadn't done this, that we wouldn't have made the connection. So yeah, he was sort of, for some reason, wanted to push us together and say, here you are, here you both are.
Yeah, so, yeah, absolutely.
I remember you were quite. Yeah, it was quite a moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was big. I think I was so emotional. I think we hugged for ages, and I kind of make me, I think, choke about it now, because it was a really difficult time for me in that, I didn't have anybody around me that really believed what was going on, and I felt very alone at that point, I think, and it was just the fact that this had happened, and it was you who was such a good friend of Chris. It wasn't like some acquaintance that he sort of met, and it just gave. I mean, and you were very sweet, and what you were saying, you said to me about, that you had kind of admiring what I was doing, and that I was. Just the support. I think you said you didn't know quite what to say to before, but now I was there in front of you. It was something that it was just an emotional time. So yeah, and then we went off we had our break then, didn't we? And we went off, and then when we came back, we had to pick up this oracle card, and they were all over the floor of the atrium, the theatre, and I picked up Trust Your Path, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a great one, thank you. So underneath it says, if you knew you would be supported, what would you do? So that was my one. And I think you had, was it that one you had?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so that's double mission, channeling and uplifting humanity. So you certainly uplifted me on that day. So that was
good.
That was beautiful. And then we had to do then the next part of it, and like this is the end part of the event, really. But we had to write down what she gave us, all these little cards.
Yes.
The little heart cards and the crystal.
Yeah.
And we had to write down what was in our, I think it was, what were we going to leave, like what was our sort of mission once we'd left. And mine was working with Christian to heal and transform grief in the world, It was like this massive, great statement. And I was like, oh, again, that's a big statement. It's like, this is Christian's energy just going, come on, we've got to do this. And then we had to make one comment or one action, like promise one thing. And mine was write a book proposal. Yeah. So that kind of set me on the path. I guess, like you were saying, it was confirmation for me that I was talking to Christian. You know, there was definitely something, he was working some magic there. But it was also really laying the foundations for what we were going to do together after that. It's like you have that complete trust. I mean, that day really cemented my trust in him. And also, I mean, it was funny because I think before that I'd been to see an spirit artist who someone had recommended, and I went along. It was all this sort of confirmation, trying to prove to myself that this was real. And this woman had drawn it wasn't a great picture of Christian, but it was a likeness of Christian. And so this was like a really good proof, really. And all those kind of bold steps that I then had to make, like doing his final footprints, doing the live Facebook films I actually started doing after that, and doing the retracing his footsteps with him to finding exactly what had happened to him as he was telling it. So yeah, it was a real sort of strength of purpose as well, and this gift of strength. I mean, that's essentially what Christian gave me, was that gift of strength. So that was all through meeting you. That was kind of how that worked. But yeah, did you get anything else from the event as well? I mean, what remember. Was his?
I've got such a bad memory. My old age, I can't remember anything. But you just saying that just reminds me of something that Chris always used to say to me. I've said this to you before, but he always used to say, just don't worry, Jaffs. What doesn't. If I thought I'd offended somebody or whatever, he'd just say, don't worry about it. They'll get over it. Don't worry about it. And that's like a little catchphrase of his that I always really remember. And that's sort of quite pertinent in terms of what you were going through then, because it is difficult, I think, putting yourself out there, and especially when it's something so incredibly personal as like the loss of your brother. It's quite hard. It's an extremely hard thing to do, and but that's so Chrissy, isn't it? Just get on with it. Who cares what other people say or think? Just do it. Yeah.
Actually, it was funny because after you said that to me the other day, so we had a chat, I actually looked back in where Christian and I wrote together, and actually, so even like a month before we had that event where we met, he'd said to me, so I was feeling nervous about putting out the book and the whole reaction, and he actually said to me, you need to have a little look at the dread which you have of being in the spotlight. You're going to have to get used to it. You need to enjoy it, feel it, realize people look up to you and respect you, and just flow with it all. It's just lovely what's going to happen for you. And then he said, be strong-willed. Don't ever back down or apologize for the words you've been gifted. You worked very hard for them. Own them. You deserve everything. You will limit yourself. So
that's so Chrissy.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's funny because there's other friends of Christian have been in touch over the years, and you always think, don't speak ill of the dead, and people are always very sort of, oh yeah, he was lovely, and which Christian was lovely, he was like universally loved, as you said, but there was a side to him as well that was he could be quite argumentative. He could be, could be, if he thought he was right.
He could be belligerent, couldn't he?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, we had the picture we're painting with Christian, like his true self and his real self that he didn't show a lot of. It's he feels it's really important that he's seen for all his faults and all his, alongside all the great stuff, because like that's the truth. And it's interesting where we were talking about, I was wondering, because part of the thing with Christian is this book proposal that he sort of said, it ended up being his grief and the things that he needed to work out of himself as well. That kind of came out with the book writing. I mean, we haven't actually written, I've written lots of book proposals, but it's never been quite complete or the right time, because we had to kind of go through the process and unravel his grief as well as mine. So the whole thing in the book is actually taking out all the goodness from the story, but being really truthful and getting down to the real dirt of it. But it's funny, we were talking about something Christian told me, which I was surprised about. And I don't think he's well, I'll read what he says, but I don't think anyone at uni knew that this was part of his life. But we were talking about his parachute jump that he had. I mean, I don't know if he ever told you about his parachute jump that went. It was at school. Like, I think he must have been 17. And he went he was in the army cadets, and he went on a parachute jump, and he'd gone on, and it was near his birthday, on his birthday, 17th birthday. And he went for the training, but when they were training, they were practicing jumping out of one particular side of the aeroplane. But when he went and actually did the jump, they were actually jumping out of the other side. And right. he couldn't, he was just like, oh, I have to get this right in my head. And he actually, the guy said to him, are you ready to jump? And Christian sort of put his hand up and went, not yet, I'm still not quite there. But he got turfed out. And I remember him telling me about it, and I didn't realize how it had affected him, but he got himself tangled up in the wires, and he was plummeting down to earth. And he said in his head, he was going through like this film of his life. It was literally saying goodbye to everybody. And then he heard this voice, and he said, the voice told him, it's not your time yet. You have to get yourself free and, come down to earth. And I know we were just talking the other day about, you mentioned actually Anita Morjani about her story, where I don't know if you want to just tell the story about her and what she felt when she came back from that experience. It was like I think she also heard a voice about, it's not your time.
That's right. I think it was her father, she was communicating with, who said, it's not your time, and you need to turn back. You've done the hard work now, and you've done the pain, and there are great gifts waiting for you, and you need to go. Yeah, you need to go back. If you go any further, you'll be in the death realm, and that you can't turn back from that.
Yeah, and it's like, I think she made a promise to like live fearlessly
exactly.
After that. Yeah. And like live life with abandon. And I think Chris had the same experience. Like he was always searching for like, why had that happened? Why have I been given like a second chance? And I think that ties in with all this, you know, walking on the cranes and things like that, and doing trips to Africa solo. Yeah, exactly. But we were also Christian. Part of the thing about is that he always was nervous about being believed, and this is why the book's taken, and he's taking a long time to do. But these podcasts, actually, they've been brilliant at bringing the story forward, and just it's been flowing really well. But he told me about his true his experiences with angels, and I mentioned this to you, and he'd obviously never mentioned anything to you. No. But if I can just read what he says, because he does mention about where this sort of angels work came from, and even at uni what he was doing. So if you don't mind, just read this. So he's talking about so he had, I'll talk about this in another podcast, but he had visitations from angels while he was in Africa, but he's just talking about where they came from. So when he was really little, he used to see fairies and other presences, and children would come and sit on his bed with him when he was at boarding school, and they were always silent companions. We never talked, never, but there was always this comforting presence, like a warm blanket being placed around me, the warmth emanating from them. Those angels were our ancestors, Han, not just our blood ancestors, but everyone's ancestors from eons ago. So I started to work with these angels after I left school and went to university. I kept very quiet, in fact, silent about what I got up to. I felt I had to be secretive, as no one would understand what I was up to. Several of the girls suspected something was up with me, as I was prone to disappearing at odd hours, claiming to be on some errand, and would come back drained yet animated. There was no drugs involved when I was working. Ever since the parachute jump, I'd been searching for my purpose, and these beings would lead me off to help children, small and large children. By large, I mean children in adult bodies. That's why I was working at, actually that doesn't matter, but that's why I was always drawn to children, because they reminded me of the angel energy I could feel around my silent friends. At university, I started to visit children, but they weren't children who were physical. It's hard to explain, but I didn't physically work with these children. I worked with them energetically. I suppose it would be easiest to, he's here. I suppose it would be easiest to explain it as Reiki. When I say I would disappear at university, it wouldn't be physically leaving the house or room, but I would sort of leave my body and go to these children who were in need of help. I would visit them in their dreams, or at night, or when they were lonely and scared. I was a bit like that invisible friend character. I still do this work, Han. It's my speciality. I arrive in all sorts of guises. Unicorns are a favourite for the girls. The boys prefer the teddies and talking dinosaurs. I realise this is all going to be a stretch of the imagination, but it's my truth. And that's kind of what he said. And then he then talks about the angels in Africa, which I'll have put in the next podcast probably, because it's all to do with, definitely the sort of Africa. I
never knew that.
Does that surprise you?
No, not really. But probably it would have surprised me then, at 20 or whatever. I don't know what I'd have thought about it then, to be honest. I definitely have found it more far-fetched then than I do now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so like this is all that's he battled for a long time with sort of telling the truths of his experience, because it was unusual. I don't think people were talking about it, and maybe he's it's like important to own these truths, I guess. And it's like he's sort of saying the unexpected things that happen. You have to accept them and allow them to be part of you, and to sort of surrender to it and to not fight these things and it's all about opening up, isn't it? It's like opening up and being open to what life is truly.
Surrender. That's a good word. That's a good word. That just rather than fighting it. We can't explain everything. It's just not. We just can't. And I don't know. As I've got older, I've just accepted it. I think it's difficult when you're younger. Mm-hmm. You've got a different focus. You're very outward looking. As you get older, it's I don't know. You just change, don't you? And become more open and realise that we don't have all the answers to everything, and that's actually quite magical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And it's been, I think there's an element of encouragement as well, actually, in Christians, in how this is all happening, is encouraging people to be their truth selves, I guess, and to not, and like you said, he was very sure that he wasn't going to change for anybody else. He certainly wasn't going to not go to Africa. Mum would always say to him, she kept saying, oh, bloody Bamako, because all he would ever talk about was Bamako, which is actually where he ended up. But this whole trying to put him off or trying to talk him round was just never going to happen. And there's that the destiny life, the life that you're destined, and he was going to do it. There was no one.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's really hard for us to understand why that was his destiny. Why he had to, go through that and not be here anymore, not in this physical realm. But it just is. And it's easy for me to say it because I'm not his sister or his mother or father, but. I don't mean it in a glib way, but it definitely was Chris's destiny, and he probably understands more about why that was his destiny now in the realm that he's in. But I think for us here, it's quite hard to. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. But I think he's definitely wanting to expand it, and this is the beginning of another. I do feel like this is the beginning of another step in what he wants to achieve, and to explain all of this to everybody, the destiny, why he was drawn there. And definitely I think probably the next episode will be all about that, and that he just had to do it. And it is difficult to understand, isn't it? Definitely. But
I look forward to hearing the next episode and hearing why that was his destiny.
Yeah. Okay. Well, lots of love, and thank you so much, Sara, for joining us. Really appreciate really appreciate you being here. So okay, lots of love.
Take care.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Finder of Lost Things. I think we've been triggered so long and so hard by COVID, and it's going to carry on. People are getting used to stillness, and they're getting used to more solitude. But how do you use that time for the highest good? This process that we're going to explore will bring back the joy and purpose to life. That wholeness, that sort of harmony and flow and togetherness. People are really ready to find their lost parts now. You can find me at hannahvelton.online.
Views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the station, its management, or advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.